is presenter Call. Call, welcome to the Liberia History Channel.
It's always my pleasure to present with you, Dennis.
We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. This is the Liberia History Channel, and we're going to be talking about the history of our culture. Cause somebody watching this, just put this on and their title blink in there and say, "What is that?" Because we are so used to all this different culture now, and now we're talking about the history of our culture. What does that mean to you?
It means that out of many has come one. Has come one. We do have a collective culture. We do have a shared experience. We do have a Liberian identity, and I think we often mute that and often want to emphasize on things that we don't even any longer practice. We have more in common than not. And after almost 200 years of oneness and collective effort and interaction, we have become more alike than unalike as a Liberian people. We have become more alike than unalike as Liberian people. So our culture, there is a cultural continuity among our people, of all the diverse origin and language and everything else, religion. There is still very unique aspects of being Liberian that is really that really dominates, for the most part, who we are and how we function culturally, how we interact with the world outside of Liberia. There's consistency, and even ethnic groups that exist, trans-boundary ethnic groups, meaning ethnic groups that exist within Liberia and also within other countries. Liberians often are more alike and share more kinship with ethnically different people within Liberia than they do with their own ethnic groups outside of Liberia. So there's usually, which is very, very strange to say, but a mono woman like myself would have more in common with a Bassa woman in Liberia than I would with a mono woman in Guinea. This is just a fact. So there's a cultural aspect of being a Liberian that is very strong and has shifted over the last almost 2 centuries and has made us a unique and collective, or created for us, or developed, evolved in us a unique and collective identity.
Hmm. So, I know most of the time, and we're going to get into it. We talk about ethnic groups, the tribe. This is this region, this is that region. But you were saying so. There's too much in our discourse. There's too much emphasis placed on our differences than our similarities. You say.
Yeah, we like to do that, right? We like to hyper focus on our identity. We'll say, during the election, it was so evident. People would say things, oh, the Southeasterners. I mean, as if that's some kind of real identity. And what is really the difference between people who are living in Plebo or Zwedru? What is really the difference between their wants and needs and aspirations from somebody living in Buenjama or Zorzor or Ganta? Not really a whole, a lot. Is this really all of them swallowing the same dumbo
Yeah,
from Basa,
they
all of
fight
them,
about
all of
rice.
them eating potato greens, So this whole thing about, it's like we're trying to cling on to things, but the reality is we are more alike than unalike.
Yeah, I was in a place among Liberians in Guinea from the Baye region in Lofa, and we went on the farm. Right, I was
Yeah.
behaving like, and the little stream, the water. They say, "Oh, Mr. Job, we can wash water. Oh." You just take the water and drink it, whether it's clean or dirty, and that was not unique to them. All
No.
the way to the deepest part of Sino, we said we can wash water.
Well, some of that thing is generally West African, So we're going to talk about that. Some cultural aspects we have are generally West African, right? So you could go to like Nigeria. You go as far away as Nigeria and see some cultural similarities between Igbo people and yourself. But what I'm really talking about, there's things that are unique to us that you don't find in other parts of West Africa. Even next door is Sierra Leone and Guinea and Ivory Coast. So we're going to talk about this in 2 parts, part one and part two. Today we're going to focus on part one, which a lot of the background of it. And then, we're going to examine the unique historical experiences. These are historical experiences that are unique to Liberia, that make us Liberian. Now, Do we have shared historical experiences with other West Africans? Yes, we do. Do we have shared historical experiences with other Africans generally? Of course we do. Do we have, but there are certain things that are unique to Liberia that makes us a now, after almost 200 years, a very unique culture that we cannot ignore. That has made us a new and unique, not new, I don't think new is the correct word, but a different and distinct culture.
Right. So let's get into it. The history of our culture, examining the unique historical experiences that make us Liberian.
Yes, sir. So, go ahead, Dennis.
So we start with definition, right?
Yeah.
What's culture? Culture refers to the characteristics, beliefs, customs, practices, values, and behaviors of a particular group of people. Culture encompasses various aspects such as language, religion, art, music, cuisine, clothing, social norms, and traditions. Culture is transmitted from one generation to another through socialization. Culture provides a framework for individuals to understand the world.
So this is what culture is, and this is what my mentor, my mentor, Professor Mahmoud Al Kati, who's now retired, always used to tell us when we were children, culture is everything you make and do, your behavior, what you create. This is your culture. So culture isn't stagnant. It can change. It can evolve. It can devolve. It can degenerate. It can elevate. It can become enlightened. It can grow, and it can also disappear if it's no longer useful. So there's cultural things that can completely fall out of favor with a generation. They can just stop doing it. There's
Mhm.
no more need for us to do this particular thing. We're not going to do it anymore. And then tradition are those aspects of culture sometimes that we hold on to in spite of whether or not they're useful, right? So we still hold on to things sometimes when they're not even useful. So culture is very complicated. Some things we just hold on to because it's beautiful, or because we like it, or because we fear to let it go, even if it's no longer of use. Here are some really beautiful artifacts in the picture there that's next in the first slide. These are various artifacts from Liberia that were sketched in 1890, in the year 1890. And these are different types of course, you've got daggers that, for fighting war, or for hunting or whatever else. You've got a spear there. You have a warrior's headdress. You have a water bottle and a sword. Most of these things were intricately designed and were considered to have some level of uh, spiritual
Ritual.
attributes and values based on the culture. So this is very powerful. These things come from within the boundaries of the Republic of Liberia. Can you see similar things in Guinea and Sierra Leone and northern Ivory Coast? Yes, you can. But these particular things were unique to the people of Liberia, what we call the native or the indigenous people of Liberia. So I wanted to point that out. Very artistic, very beautiful.
Hmm. See, Muhammad Salih Abdukle, who lost long time, he's writing here. Culture can easily be described and defined. Muhammad, come on the show.
Depending on the language you're speaking, culture can be easily defined and described depending on the language you're speaking. We're going to get into language and how language either helps expression or retards expression, depending on your understanding of it. So description and definition are really the same thing. But in some ways, depending on the language you speak, you may use more words to describe and explain the meaning of something, but it's still a definition. Um, and you may use fewer words depending on the language you speak. You may use more words to describe something in one language and fewer words to describe the same thing in another language. Language is also going to be discussed, and it's very important. We can go on to the next slide, Dennis.
Human languages have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years through a combination of geographical and biological factors. Geography and terrain influences language. In tropical regions with heavy forested landscapes, the languages and dialects spoken tend to use more vowels and softer consonants than the dialects spoken by people in colder and drier areas.
Yes. So this is very there's also a biological aspect to language that we don't really talk about. Why are we able to speak? So language is also the interaction between it's basically a complex interaction between your genetic predispositions, your ability to, basically pronounce. So this is a physical part, and also it helped. The biology of it is whether or not you can even make the tones consistently, and how your mind and your brain retrieve the information and the codes that we use to communicate. It is extremely complicated. We are, for the most part, the only creatures on the planet that express language in the complex way that we do. So the geographical influences are, this is more theoretical from linguists. What they think is that, and it's because they see a consistency, they're making an assumption. So consistently in warmer climates, people tend to speak with more vowel sounds. And consistently in colder climates, people tend to speak with more consonant sounds. Their assumption is that the environment has influenced the language. That's possible. That's just a theory. I don't necessarily know which came first. It's possible that maybe the people who, utilize more consonants migrated to colder climates. Who knows? Or maybe, the vowels fell out of favor over time. But does it mean that the environment directly influenced the way you pronounce words? Or is it just coincidental? But many linguists believe that it's a causal factor for why European languages use more consonants, Nordic languages, languages in Northern Asia compared to Southern Asia and the Southern Hemisphere, warmer climates like West Africa, where we're from, tend to use more vowels when we speak. The other thing is the photo, the sketch, again from the year 1890. These are traditional spoons, and spoons are cultural. We talk a lot about, people eating with their hands and all of this, but it's not because we lack utensils. We've been making spoons for over 2,000 years in West Africa. So we do have spoons. We have traditional spoons. And it's an artisan form. They're used sometimes for different purposes and rituals, but we do have spoons, clearly. But I just wanted to point that out. These are some sketches of some spoons that German explorers and anthropologists found within various cultures, and they sketched them. And I think they're beautiful. I hope somebody recreates these just for artistic reasons.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Especially, and I've seen some of those spoons, like Coke spoon, right? The one we make, yeah. The fufu stick.
Exactly. When they say, "Oh, the people never had spoons," no, we had spoons. We had spoons. Clearly, we had spoons for many, many, many centuries. And these again were sketched within the geographical boundaries of Liberia. So these are from different cultures.
And talking about how the geographical factors influence the language, it is believed that people who live near the sea, they talk loud, right?
Yes, I've heard this.
That's something there.
Yeah, because they're saying that they speak more loudly because they can't, So
You gotta speak loud to hear you because of the sea, the noise it makes.
Exactly. So language, Dennis, is not just the spoken word. Language can also be expressed through writing. And I want you all to look at this map and look at where Liberia is. So the original syllabaries, original scripts that are recognized globally by linguists, that are created and evolved on their own, independent of other cultural influences. They're so unique that they can be considered independently evolved, right? So we have the syllabaries of the world. Those are the ones that are in red. And they're not necessarily, they're basically independently evolved. And the understanding that linguists have is syllabaries took many, many centuries to evolve. However, for reasons unknown to me, we attribute the Vi script to one individual who supposedly just wrote it, just came up with it. Because they asked him why was he writing the Vi or Vey language in Arabic script? Don't you have your own script? He said, yes, we do. And he comes back and presents the script after a couple of days in the syllabary. And they say, oh, he's a genius. He just invented this suddenly out of thin air. It's better to attribute genius to one individual than to all of his ancestors that came before him. Because that's what racism does. It makes people not be able to analyze situations correctly. I will tell you that the Vi script, what's the best way I can put this? The Vi syllabary or the Vi script is supposedly invented by Dwalu. But at the same time, cultural and linguistic experts assume that these things evolved over centuries. Simple drawings evolved more into more complicated syllabi and so on. So the argument they make is that the Vi script is the only script that was suddenly invented just by one individual. And it just doesn't, for me, I don't know what you think, Dennis, this part of it, it's like, how much do we just accept what these people tell us about ourselves and about our people? But what are your thoughts on that?
Right. And I always wonder about that too. And I am happy you brought that up. But because what we learn is, hey, he learned this in his sleep. In other words, some spirit taught him, right?
So yeah, so Mamadou Dwalu Bukele, he was from a part of Cayman called Jandu. He was a scholar. At the point when outsiders would come, the Arabic script would be used to write African languages. So you're using the Arabic script to write African language, not the Arab language. This is very important. So literacy, the same way, for example, we use the Roman script to write English and French and German and Russian, right?
Right.
And we, so the Arabic script was used to write Madinka. The Arabic script would have been used to write Fulani. The Arabic script was used to write Vi. What is the reason for that? Everyone universally recognized it. It didn't mean that Vi people didn't have a script. And because Mamadou Dwalu Bukele wrote Vi in Arabic, he was questioned. Why are you all using this language to write, these characters to write your language? And he said, no, we have a script. He comes back with the script. Now all this folklore comes around it like he must have just invented this in 1830. That's not very miraculous if he did, because it is unlike other languages. And this is why on this map, it is shown as a distinct syllabary. It's not based on Arabic, because if you would think if it didn't exist before and you wanted to create one, it would be like Arabic. But the Vi script is very much unlike Arabic. It is very unique. We don't have syllabaries that are recognized anywhere else. If they existed before in any other part of Africa, south of the Sahara Desert or north of the Sahara Desert, we don't know that they exist any longer. This is extremely powerful. My theory, and I want to put a big, disclaimer here, these are my thoughts. If you look at Africa continent, only the Vi script is there. So my theory is It is possible there were other syllabaries,
Yeah.
but they were abandoned in favor of the use of Arabic, the Arabic script, not the language, but the script. Because if something isn't useful, why would you pass it on? Like anything with culture, correct?
Right.
So if your ancestors had a syllabary or a script, you wouldn't need to pass it on to anyone. And I want to believe that Mamolu Dwalu Bekele inadvertently saved the Bai script for human history by presenting it to European scholars who were questioning him. Had he not done that, we may not know it existed at all in this century,
Yeah.
because many, many things from our history have been lost. So had he not said, no, we have a script and here it is, and you can have samples of it. And here's the syllabary, here's the sounds, here's the corresponding sounds that go along with this, right? If he had not done that, we would not know anything about the Bai script. And maybe that's what has happened on the rest of the continent. Because as old as the empires are north of us, they don't have any original scripts. And it might be because of that whole empire syndrome. You become more modern. You don't any longer need to use these old writing systems that your ancestors used because they out of favor. Other people can't understand them, which is exactly what would have happened to the Bai script had he not presented it and it being preserved. Because the truth is, Vai people today don't typically use this because it is basically it's a dead script. It's no longer of use. They use the Latin or the Roman alphabet, I should say, the Roman alphabet in order to write the Vai language today, for the most part. I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And yes, granted, he was a genius, but I wonder he alone was using the script at
And
the
he
time.
never said he invented it either.
Right.
He never said he invented it. He said we have a script and this is it. And then he must have invented this because these Negroes don't have scripts. He's an individual genius because you cannot attribute this to his people because now you have to question everything in your mind if you're a white supremacist. If you're going to attribute this high level human culture to these Vai people on the coast, that means your whole worldview as a racist has to be reconsidered. So it was easier for them to just say, well, he's just one individual anomaly that was able to do this unbelievable thing, instead of saying his people have passed this down for centuries.
Interesting. And here is the Vice script.
There it is. Found on artifacts older than 1830, which is also very important. So in our culture, before you go to that, I wanted to point something out. So we have these Safis where West Africans, as they adopted Islam, even if they weren't Muslim, you could put Quranic verses on something, on some type of cloth, and you could put, or paper even, and put that within some kind of charm as protection, Quranic verses. We have found Safis that have Bai script written on them and put into these things as protection. So you would have someone maybe have some type of necklace or neck dress where it might be a pouch. And when you open that, inside is Bai script, writing some kind of incantation in the Bai language. So it is possible that we went from doing that in our own script to now saying, okay, we're going to do this with the Arabic script as we adopt Islam. This is very, very important. Because that practice that we do in West Africa is unique to us.
Language and culture go together. Language isn't just a way to communicate. It is a component of culture that makes it unique and specific. When language and culture are discussed, the phrase language is culture and culture is language is often mentioned because the two are always intertwined. This means that the language you speak reflects your values and beliefs. Language can change
I'm
how
sorry, it's supposed to be Can, Dennis. You know I don't have a secretary. CAN.
language can change how we see things.
Yes, that's so important. Language can change how we see things. It can change the way we understand the world because the description, having the tools to describe and interpret what you're seeing, and being able to share those thoughts in clear, concise language could be inhibited by which language you're communicating in, and also your mastery of that language. And so to use a language that did not evolve a particular cultural thing to describe a cultural thing becomes a challenge. So to use the English language, for example, to describe cultural things that did not evolve among Germanic languages or Anglo-Saxons is a challenge. So when you go and you see the ge inima, you say devil. When you see betu, you see devil, because you don't have the language to understand what what betu actually means. So the English language then inhibits your ability to properly interpret
Right.
the culture that you're describing. You're limited to use words that you are familiar with, the words that you understand.
Right.
And so when someone says ge in Nimba, ge, and you're an Anglo speaking or English speaking person, it takes them, this statement Mohammed Salih Dukli made is very powerful. Culture can be easily described and defined. What I'm hearing him say is the amount of language it's going to take for a Madinka person to interpret certain aspects of culture to an English speaking person are going to be, it's a complex exchange
Yeah.
because they don't have that linguistic foundation to even be able to grasp it in certain terms. Sometimes you can use one word in Mandinka, and then if you have to explain it in English, it's going to be a paragraph or two, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's why even like in Malika, if what the Anglo-Saxon person will call mother, so if the Malika person says that, you they will understand it as as the equivalent of mother. So they
yeah.
always confuse when we say, "Oh no, this is not," because mother in a Liberian African culture would not be exactly the same as a European will understand mother.
I mean, in a sense, because you have a word that means the person who gave birth to you.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's very universal. You know, who gave birth to you? My mother, my mère, right? Ma, whatever languages you're speaking, and mother, interesting and love, ma, mama, these are things that you hear in almost every language in the world. So for some reason, human children, their first utterance is always ma. So most of the time, people can connect on those basic words because all human beings are somewhat connected. We're the
Right.
same on some level.
But
But a good example, Dennis, is more looking at electricity. So if I say electricity, how do I explain electricity in the year 1920 to someone who has no idea what I'm talking about? I use the English word electricity. And they say, and let's say the person is speaking Basa, what is electricity? So now the English speaker has to explain in how many words what electricity is to the Basa person, if the Basa person is unfamiliar with electricity, because it wasn't evolved in Basa culture. So now you have to explain the energy, how it's conducted with copper, and how it does this. It's able to do that. It becomes way too complicated. Easier explained than defined, as Muhammad Salih Dukley said.
Right.
But if you say,
and what I meant with the mother example is, if you say mother in Malika or in Grebo or in Kran, not necessarily the person who gave birth to you.
yes,
So it will take you some time to explain it to someone who is not from that culture, because
got you.
you will literally think it is the biological mother.
Right. And then just to go back and to discuss the photo, Dennis, in the previous one. So this is a ankle bracelet. So imagine how thick this is. This is worn all throughout the ethnic groups in Liberia, but mostly on the coast. These ankle bracelets were worn by women.
Right.
Beautiful and this is an artifact from pre-Liberia, so dating back to around 1800, between 1790 and 1800. So we had these, these beautiful adornments and so on. But you could go to the next slide. I just wanted to let people know what that is, because it looks like a ring, but it's actually an ankle bracelet. So the size is much larger than what it may appear in the photo.
This is spiritual too.
Yes, and we'll talk about that shortly. Most of these things we attribute, most of our traditional cultures we attribute spiritual value to.
Yeah. I think I saw my aunt wearing one.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Origins. The exact origin of human language are still debated, but it is generally believed to have emerged around 100,000 to 200,000 years ago with the emergence of Homo sapiens. Language likely evolved as a means of communication and social interactions among early human populations. Cultural and social influences. Language is deeply rooted in culture. As humans migrated across different regions, various groups developed unique linguistic systems based on their specific needs, environmental conditions, and cultural practices. Over time, these different languages diverged and evolved independently.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Here are more artifacts from our region from the 1800s. You see the game, awole, different ways to pronounce it in our region. All over the continent of Africa, you can find this game as far away as Kenya. When you see something that spread out, usually it shows very ancient origins.
Yeah.
So these are some, and again, this necklace that you see, they would have typically would have the Quranic verse in there written in Arabic, even if they weren't Muslim, which is very interesting, as a blessing or protection. And as I said, they would also see these in Bioscript. And I see Muhammad Salih Dukley asking about Nko. Nko is not Nko is not considered in a original syllabary. That's why it wasn't on that linguistic map. Because really that was invented, I think, in 1949 or somewhere in the 1940s. I believe it was 49. And so that was actually just like how they say, oh, they got Basa script, they got this script. Those are scripts that are actually based on other scripts, and they're not original and unique in the way that the ones in the red dots on the original map are recognized to be. So it's a little bit different, not a little bit different, it's a lot different. So that is not what Mamadou Dualu Bukele did in 1830. What he did was he presented something that I very strongly believe that he learned, and that was, and it's recognized as a unique script, as as a unique and original script, as opposed to a lot of these modern variations of scripts that are based on other things.
Right.
So Nko is very new. It's a very new writing system, and it's recognized that way.
The game at the bottom, I don't know how I forgot to play this game. I learned it. I learned it
Very,
little.
very fun game. I have one here at the house.
Yeah, I have to learn it again. I forgot completely.
The ones in Ghana, they use these little seeds. And I got one of them at the Accra Art Center many years ago.
I
That
learned
was
it in
very
Ghana,
nice.
actually. I saw it in Liberia, but I didn't play in Liberia. I
Yeah.
learned it in Ghana.
All right. So here are some sandals that are made by the Mendes ethnic groups, and that's Mendinka, um, what do you call it? Mendinka, Bandi, Mano, Northern Pele. These groups used to make these crafts, sandals, um, and that's what the sketches from 1890. Go ahead, Dennis.
Natural selection, that's number three now.
Hmm.
Languages evolve through a process similar to biological evolution, known as natural selection, the survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
Language
So
contact.
I just want to come in and say, so to reiterate, the reason people would lose scripts and lose languages and adopt other languages and lose maybe their original tongue and become, you know, we've talked about this many times, the massive ethnic groups in West Africa, like the Fab or Fulani, as we call them, or the Mandinka, these very large ethnic groups, Yoruba, Hausa. It is because they get swallowed by stronger groups and merge and then leave their traditional language and culture and become. So every time you see these massive ethnic groups, it's not because they're having more children, but because they win more wars and conquer more people. And those conquered people then become themselves. That's how language spreads. The reason you see language spreading. And then also the secondary factor is because of trade. Many of these stronger, more powerful languages adapt or acquire more speakers because they become trade languages. They become, the language, the official language of a region, of a very culturally and linguistically diverse region. This happened with Fulani, this happened with Mandinka, this happened with Kiswahili in the East, Hausa, all of these things. So it's something very important. So it's basically survival of the fittest. The language, and many of these large languages are easier to learn. They're much easier to learn. So people who have a different tongue as their primary language would be able to easily adopt Mandinka or Fulani or all these larger regional languages so that they could communicate. And then when you speak a language, therefore your culture has now been changed because of the spoken language. Speaking a language makes you that culture eventually. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Dennis.
Language contact. As societies interacted through trade, migration, and conquest, languages came into contact with one another. This contact often led to the exchange of linguistic features, resulting in language borrowing and the development of new language variants. Sound changes. Language evolution involves changes in phonetics and phonology, that is, the sound and the sound patterns. These changes can occur through processes like assimilation and regular phonetic shifts. For example, English evolved into Liberian English due to the introduction of African syntax and a systematic change in vowel sounds.
Yes. So we're going to get into that more in part two. But essentially, this is our Liberian English. Why do we speak? Why do we say things the way we do? Come and go. You're using English words, but you're putting more vowels and you're also speaking in a syntax that's unfamiliar to Anglo-Saxons or Germanic languages. So the syntax, the order of the words is different, you know? And then also the pronunciation of the words. You focus more on vowels than consonants. So when words end in consonants, it's very different from West African languages. We don't end words in consonants. So we tend to drop them when there's a word that ends in a consonant, right? Let's think of a word that ends in a consonant, a
School,
consonant sound.
school.
School. We just say school,
All right.
right? Very few words, sometimes if it ends in K, we'll pronounce the K. But very few consonant sounds will we actually use when we're naturally speaking. We will say book, right? We'll put the K there because K is a very common sound in our languages, so we don't tend to drop K sounds. But
R
many
and
other,
G and all that.
yeah,
We don't.
we'll drop those sounds. The letter T, we'll tend to drop it. Somebody say, oh, alphabet. We won't say alphabet. We'll just say alphabet. We
E.
won't want to put the T. So K is one of the exceptions, but for the most part, we'll drop the consonant sounds because we're a very vowel-rich culture. So we make the language more, but we focus on the vowels in the words and the consonants. And that's part of the reason we speak the way we do. We're focused on the vowels and the consonants.
We drop S's too and add our own thing.
Yes.
So
yes.
So sometimes instead of the S, we put them, the people them, or So
because it's not it goes against our syntax. It goes against. So we have turned the English language into an African. We have turned the English language into an African language. We speak English with an African tongue. We have Africanized the English language. We didn't break it. We built it up.
Right.
Yes.
We built it. And
so when they say we're speaking broken English, no, I'm speaking African English. I'm speaking English with an African tongue. I didn't break it. I built it around my syntax.
We should do that.
That's what we should tell people.
Right. I like how you put it. So we drop this thing. Is that the reason why we put a lot of in Liberia? We put a lot of A's and O's at the end.
Yeah, yo, Dennis. Because we have to use vowels. It is the syntax. It is thousands and thousands of years of linguistic development. We're not going to just throw that away. Now, that being said, this is learned, language is learned behavior. Language is learned just like culture is learned. Nobody's born with knowledge. You're born with certain instincts, but not with knowledge. Knowledge is things, culture is something that you learn after you're born. You're born into it, but you're not born with it. So if someone gives birth to a Russian baby and that Russian baby is taken to Nengbe or Seklepie and raised by parents from Seklepie, and those parents from Seklepie speak the Madinka language, and those Madinka people or Mano people in Seklepie raise that child in their culture, the culture of the Seklepie people, guess what? Right. That Russian child will think and function like the people that raised them.
We're in Josimala.
And it will just tell you, you Jato, don't worry about it. You look different from the people, but that's the power of it. We can go to the next slide.
Some of our linguistic diversities.
Yes.
So beautiful.
So let me please, thank you, Dennis. I need to mention what this artwork is. So has anyone heard of Alfred Yegon?
What's the last name?
Yegon.
Yegon. No.
Yegon. Yeagon. Yegon. So he's a Maman from Nimba, from my ethnic group. And he was a master carver. He was responsible for the people at the leprosy village in Ganta. He, along with my late father and others in the 70s, making sure that Yegon was able to transfer his craft to the people in the leprosy village so that they could be kind of like a tourist attraction to raise money for their own medical care and their upkeep. And it became a massive hit. So in the 70s and 80s, the leprosy camp in Ganta was able to produce artwork similar to what Yegon had taught them to do and make these masks and different cultural figures. And people would come from all over the world. If they were going to at the time, Yakepa or wherever they were going, they could stop at this village and buy artwork. And even people ordered artwork from there and it was shipped around the world as a way to raise money for the people in the leprosy camp in Ganta, right at the edge of Ganta there. And I understand to this day, they're still doing this. But this particular, all of the artwork on the slideshow is from Alfred Yegun.
Hmm.
It's from Alfred Yegun, and it is traditional abstract art done in a very ancient tradition. So this is not just random; it's traditional abstract art, and it's revered. I mean, I tried to bid for one of his pieces that were looted from Liberia. They had it at an auction, and I tried to bid for one. It was a chest. I tried to bid for it, and it started off at about $2,500, and then it went up to 9,000, almost 10,000. I just gave up. Some little chest. I said, man, I ordered this thing, and my husband would say all kind of things to me. Bitch, I leave it. So when it passed 2,500, I just stepped back. I said, this one, I'll put my same problem. He's already dealing with me in my book addiction, so this one would not be okay. So I had to back off. But I would love to see the Ministry of Information, Culture, and Tourism retrieve some of our stolen pieces, historical pieces, and bring them home where they belong.
And that's the problem I have, and let me interject this, with the Ministry of Information that has just turned into the mouthpiece of the sitting government. Ministry of
Yeah,
Information, Culture, and Tourism should be doing this. But
yeah,
hey, that's another story.
yeah,
The Gula are an ethnic group who share a common cultural heritage, language, and history, and who live primarily in western northwestern Liberia and
yeah.
eastern Sierra Leone. The Gola language is an isolated,
It's just an isolate
or
within the Niger Congo
it's an
language family. So
isolate within the Niger Congo Niger family.
yeah. So an isolate meaning that it's really not doesn't have a relative.
Just in the
It
middle of
doesn't have a
nowhere.
related. There's nothing really that close to it. So we don't really have a lot of so linguists they know that it's a Niger in Niger. I'm not French, a Niger Congo language. They know that, but it's so unique and endemic, meaning it really evolved in isolation of other members of the Niger Congo language family. So the words that are used in Gola are very different from the surrounding cultures and languages. And we had the episode where we talk about who are the natives of Liberia. Remember, we talked about Gola are some of the oldest people. Do they have Mindi influence? Yes, they do have Mindi influence. They were conquered. There's some cultural exchanges, religion, things like that. But the core of the language is very, very old to the region, found nowhere else. You can go on to the next one.
The Diwan language, also known as the Day, is a crew language of the Niger Congo language family. It is spoken primarily near the coastal areas of Monserrate County in western Liberia, including the capital, Monrovia. It has a lexical similarity with the Bassa language.
Yeah, so this is not an isolate. So either it was an isolate and they have so much interacted with Bassa that linguists can't differentiate what part of Bassa they adopted, or they have a common root. Most linguists agree that the they are part of this larger crowd or cloud or crew speaking people that is part of the larger group. Is it possible there are fewer linguists that think it is an isolate just like Gola, and that the influence of Bassa Kru, Mamba, and other Bassa Kru languages is why it looks similar. And it's the same kind of thing with the Vai language. Vai, I believe, was also a language isolate, but because of the heavy Mindi influence, it looks like it was a Mindi language. And you remember, every of this stuff is fluid. So as things evolve, you get to interact with other cultures, you become like them and lose your individuality. And by the way, these women, I'm sorry, Dennis, if you can go back to that first lady, the Gola lady.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay, so
sure.
this is a Gola woman. that was photographed in the year 1890. This is a Gola woman, so we can go to the next one. I forgot to point out what the pictures were. You can go to the next one, please.
Right. And talking about that photograph, when we were playing the song to introduce the show, Chevro Gipley said, showing additional women breasts on the show is offensive. Please, yes, it is an Asian practice, but please don't normalize it to millions of people on TV. What do you make of that?
That, I mean, he has a right to his opinion. I mean, if he wants to see this as offensive, if he's offended by his ancestors, I'm not. I see nothing here but dignity. And the only reason I blocked out these breasts is not because I think it's offensive, it's because of people with that mindset. You know, they think that they're so African, but they're not. Really, they look at themselves through the eyes of Europeans and Eurocentric thoughts. There's absolutely nothing indignant about an African woman exposing her breasts. We built whole civilizations, gave the world everything that it has, while our great ancestors were exposing their breasts. So obviously, this is not offensive. It's a mind thing. And the other thing that happens is sexualizing women to such an extent, it makes people uncomfortable because that deviant mindset that you have to objectify a woman's physical form, that if you see it, it evokes bad things in you. Therefore, it is negative. I'm not part of that. I don't ascribe to that. So you would have to ask him. But to go back, besides the Gola, we also have the beautiful Day Odolian woman who was wearing the double lapa.
Yeah.
Very intricately designed on the previous slide.
Oh yeah.
This is Gola. The next one, yeah. So do you see how she? Yeah. So this is Gola. The next one is the Day.
And then we go to the they.
Yeah. And then so now we're with so these are Vai women. And you see the heavy Mendi influence. They similarly look like the people who they were in close proximity with, except now you have them, you know, this looks more like a northern influence. Because you remember when we did the episode about the Vai, we talked about the influx of people from the north intermarrying and interacting with them, and the Vai culture itself evolving into looking more like a Mendi culture. This is an example. Because these are women dressing like way you would see women in Mali dressing at the time period. Again, another photograph from the year 1890. So the Vai language, also called Vai or the Galinas language, is also an isolate language, heavily influenced by Mendi. You're on the wrong slide, Dennis.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah. So it's heavily influenced by the Mandi culture and vocabulary. For this reason, it is often mischaracterized as a Mandi language. But, you know, for reasons I explained in other episodes about the influence from the north. And Vai people, the Galinas people, were conquered by the Fulani at one time. I mean, there's been a lot of history and interaction with not only the Mendi, but the North Atlantic people as well. We can go to the next slide.
The Kru are a West African ethnic group that are indigenous to eastern Liberia. They are also known as Krau, Kru, or Kru.
Yes.
She really bluffing you.
Right, the other ladies were sitting around this one. She's just cool. Maybe, you know, maybe she's an ancestor of MC Cairo. Maybe she was a musician. Who knows? But I love her her ankle jewelry. Powerful.
Oh yeah.
And so this is something that women wore in other parts of West Africa, but oh, you're on the other slide already. You're running with these slides. So. But the ankle adornments and jewelry is very common in the Kru, what we call Kru today, and Global people. So Dennis, your people love this jewelry, and that's where it's very heavily concentrated. So I think the other cultures may have borrowed this more from the people that are in present day Sino, Maryland, those areas.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got the Mamba. This is a Mamba woman. Oh, the little circle move. Sorry. For those of you who are offended at your business, I tried. Um, the Mamba Basa language is a Kru language and a subset of the Basa language. So Mamba Basa people are basically Basa subset. Uh, and they were the ones who, of course, were near Monrovia, also very native to Monserrato and Margibi and all those places. So they're close to the Gibi people, which is also a subset of Basa. So Basa people have so many subsets because this is where they're from. This is their origin. So, and they're spread out between modern day Riversas and some of these other areas. But we can continue.
So the dress code is culture.
Yes. I want to also say that, this idea that, so these women that were photographed in 1890, these were nobility. These were women of means. This was nobility. So these beautiful fabrics that they wore were extremely expensive. Some
Yeah.
of these, if you go back even to the Vai, some of these fabrics are silks that were brought from a distances like Morocco. So you imagine these distance traders are bringing these far away fabrics, plus the ones that we reproduced as a people. And what did they do with them? They layer them. So we've
Yeah.
got our traditional fabric. We've got fabric coming from Senegambia region. We've got fabric coming from Western Sahara, Morocco, because the distance traders used to bring trade in cloth and fabric and all of these things. So if you were a member of nobility, if you were a princess, if you were the daughter or the wife of a chief, you would have access to these very rich textiles. As opposed to, and then the next one I'm going to show you is a person who was photographed, a Ma woman who was photographed in the year 1926.
Yes, I remember the Harvard expedition.
Yes, she was photographed in 1926. And in 1926, you have had the degradation of the rolling wars. You've had a lot. So she was more wearing a basic mud cloth, nothing elaborate. It's not the expensive, rich fabric of, our people, but she's wearing a very simple peasant cloth. This is to show the distinction in class. And yes, there were women in her region, but she was not a princess. She was not the daughter of a queen or anybody important. She was just a member of a peasant class, and she was photographed dressed as a peasant. What I really love about this photo is the intricacy of the hair design. This is something you see among the Mindi speaking ethnic groups. Extremely intricate. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So this of course is someone from my ethnic group. What we say Manu, we spell it Mano in Liberia. I would hope that we come to a place where we correct the names of our ethnic groups because they're a little bit ridiculous in some cases,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to referring to people as Gio, which is not who they are. Gio means slave in Basa. Um, Manu is Ma, Nu, meaning in Pele, the Ma people. So the Pele people said, those are the Manu, those are the Ma people. And they said, oh, they're Mano people, just being, so the Ma, or it can be spelled Ma, the language is Mawe, and it is a significant Mendi language, which includes, and the Mendi languages includes, Pele, Loma, Bandi, Madinka, etc. So it's part of that greater language family. So you'll see these similar hairstyles and things because the linguistic and historic and, connection between the Mendi people, they're all from one root. And the Mendi people are found in both Guinea and Liberia. So that ends that part of it. And then the final segment of this is our religious diversity. Our religious diversity.
Religious.
Yes,
So
sir.
what is religion?
Yes. So
Mono. Mhm.
before you read, I want to point out this man that's holding this it's a spear that's carved in a very on the end of a staff, which is carved in an intricate design. This person was in the Zauzau or Zor, as we spell it, but Zauzau region of Lofa, where Lofa and Bong meet, when there was no such thing as Lofa and Bong County, when it was just the North Central Territory. He's from what is around what is now Zauzau, so a place called Wuzi in that area near Zauzau, in modern day Lofa, southern Lofa near Bong. And he was just described by the photographer, the publisher, as a medicine man. And unfortunately, we don't know who he was. We don't know his name. And this is some of the unfortunate things about people who photographed our forefathers and published. They didn't care to say, this man's name was this, and this is what he did. So, oh, this is a medicine man. What does that even mean? And we had had this discussion before, Dennis, and we've been showing pictures and the very kind of nonchalant descriptions, no consideration for accuracy or anything. But they called him a medicine man, and he was sitting next to the ruined walls at the time that still existed around the town of Wuzi in Bong. But here, we're going to talk about the oldest religion in the area, right? So there were other religions like the cult of the sun, as Europeans described, and various things, but all of the traditional religions or faiths, belief systems, or sects of religions had a commonality. And this is religious history for all Liberians, including the repatriated Liberians, because they have the before they went to America, they came from somewhere. Before they went to Barbados, they came from somewhere. Okay. So this is a commonality of all Liberians. This root religion, which is still, even many ways, even as Liberians have become Muslim and Christian, they still hold on to so much of this way of understanding, just like how we express language, the English language, with our African tongues. We also practice Abrahamian religions a lot of times with our African hearts and souls. And so understanding the traditional language is how you start to understand, oh, some of this stuff we do isn't really biblical, it's our culture. The same way Europeans do many things when they practice Christianity that have nothing to do with the Bible, but with their ancient culture.
Exactly. One is Christmas. We just discussed it, right?
Right. So go ahead, Dennis.
Monotheism, worship of a creator God, respect for elders, reverence for ancestors and guardian angels, belief in spirits, a spirit world or realm where spirits and gods reside. The creator God is believed to be the maker of the universe, the sovereign ruler of the universe, and all that is in it. The creator God is invincible, infinite, and cannot be comprehended by the finite man, but is expressed through creation.
Yes. So when the Europeans came and they would see that someone would look at a great cotton tree and put an offering at the cotton tree, they say, oh, the person is worshiping the cotton tree. No, the person is communicating with God through its creation. When someone says this river is powerful, it is an expression of the creator. So one of the things that we no longer do in Liberia because of religion, Abrahamian religion, we have absolutely demonized traditional belief systems that sometimes we're just 2 or 3 generations removed from, that we're just really recently removed from in a lot of cases. Yeah. And so this is just a basic synopsis of that belief system. And no, these people were not polytheists. It's not true. If you really look at it, they really just believe in God, a creator. They're monotheists. Christians, a lot of Christians will hold on to a cross, and you go to some Catholic people's home, they'll have an altar with Mary, right?
Right.
Our people, our ancestors, our forefathers, our great grandparents, instead of, they would use prominent geographical features as a way to express their reverence for the creator that created them. So this is not about worshiping trees and worshiping rivers. It's about having reverence for the creation of the creator. And so this is very important, because when we have discussions about religion, we discount the oldest and most prominent and most universal religion, which every single Liberian become what they are today, including the repatriated Liberians. This is important, and it's never said enough. It's never emphasized enough. And there are still a small percentage of people within Liberia that still hold this in reverence. Most Liberians kind of live a duality where they've incorporated this into different parts, but it's very important. And I don't, I hear a lot of people say, oh, they were devil worshippers, they were wicked, they were worshiping trees, and they were doing this, and this is clearly not true. And also, this is not even unique, of course, to West Africa. It's not unique to Africa. This is something that all human beings instinctively respect creation in this way. So this photo was taken somewhere around 1930. I'm not exactly sure the year. And again, it was taken in this region. We can go to the next slide, Dennis.
Religious institutions have influenced many aspects of education throughout history, including the development of universities and higher education institutions. Liberian traditional schools are no different.
Yes. So I'm not saying that our traditional schools are necessarily just religious institutions, but they do convey religion through our traditional schools, as well as skills and other things that people need to learn to survive. It is normal for institutions of learning to also be based in some kind of spiritual tradition. That is normal throughout human history, right? So you have schools that are developed through this process. What we derogatorily call bush schools, because again, of our adaptation of other cultures, we see our own cultures, our own old traditions through a lens of negativity, lens of diminishing. We say things like, oh, it's offensive or it's uncomfortable. Why? Who taught us to be uncomfortable with our traditions? Even if we have abandoned them and adopted other people's traditions, it doesn't mean that you must demonize and disrespect the traditions of your people. It's a strange thing. Europeans who brought, they didn't invent Christianity. Western Europeans did not. It came from Ethiopia, from ancient Rome, through ancient Rome to Western Europe. When they introduced it to West Africa, they did it through a process somehow of making West Africans think that their traditions were bad. These same Europeans have so much reverence for their traditional pre-Christian religions that they impose those traditions upon us. And as you said, Dennis, Christmas trees, you go to, and white weddings, and all of these things have absolutely no basis in Abrahamian religion. We just do it, and we don't ask questions about why. It is European pre-Christian tradition. And these are Liberian pre-Abrahamian traditions that still exist. Some remnants of it still exist.
It's true. I said this before. We were not allowed to use kola to welcome our visitors in the church but we have all the European traditions of Christmas, which was, of course, a pagan holiday, the tree, the lights, the giving of gifts. because but
And the giving of gifts was really about putting offer evergreen tree because it is the only tree that stayed green in the winter in the north, right? So you put offerings under there, hoping
right.
and praying through this tree that spring will come, and then that you'll be able to plant again, and then, everything will thaw out and you'll have life again. So we continue that. What does that have to do with the Bible? Nothing, and it's okay, I guess, because everybody does it. But if we were to introduce some aspects of Sunday or Poro, it was that demon thing. What y'all doing? So we got to think things.
I told somebody, I said, what if we brought about Holy Communion, right, which represent blood and flesh. If you were our culture, European would say we are cannibals, right? But now
Mm-hmm.
we say this Holy Communion, the blood, the wine represent the blood, and the bread represent the flesh. So we are actually eating flesh and drinking blood. Just think about it. If we have some aspect of African tradition that we brought in the church like that, they would say, "Oh no, that's cannibalism. You're eating human beings."
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's a different show.
Yeah.
That is a
That's
different show. So these are some more photos that were taken, and I hope no. These are sacred mass dancers or the ones that are allowed to be seen in public. But these photos are published in books, and those who are in the photos knew they were being photographed because this is around 1930. So I don't know if these are actual mass deities that we're not supposed to see or not. I don't know because I'm just a layperson when it comes to this culture. But because they were published in books, I felt at liberty to share with everyone. So I hope I'm not offending anyone by showing these masks. They may or may not be, um, they may or may not be sacred. I don't know,
right.
but I just thought they were beautiful, and them being published in this way, I was amazed by So you're looking at actual animal fur. You're looking at leopard skin. This is not imitation stuff. This is the real deal. This
Mhm.
is not that old fake culture stuff we'll be doing now with the synthetic fibers. These are real animal skins. This is real leather, real, and look at the headdress, how finely woven it is. This is a masterful work of art. Again, this dancer is from the north central region of Liberia. So he's either performing for the public or he's performing for people who are within that sacred sect. And if that's the case, we're probably offending somebody right now. So let's go to the next slide. Again, when we talk about our traditions and the schools and the graduates and the reverence and the way that we celebrate, these are women who are celebrating new graduates who have emerged from the school of their traditions. And they dance in front of the women as they come out.
Young women.
You understand? So this is very. So the other thing that happens, and I'm going to show a lot of photos here before, we talk about this. Schools, the process of education through a spiritual tradition, through a practical tradition. So here you have a council of chiefs, of wise men. On the next slide, please, Dennis. These are the conduits for collective knowledge. These are the conduits for the culture. These are the conduits that are passing traditions down to the next generation. This is 1930. This is 1930, when our people still had very much, right now you see Zanzan Kawar, these political
With the
appointed chiefs
with
wearing Nigerian attire. Go ahead,
with
Dennis.
iPhone Max
I
Pro
don't
Max.
care about the use of technology. I don't think technology, having an iPhone, is an offense. I don't think driving a car is an offense. Our ancestors didn't have iPhones. Nobody's ancestors had iPhones, right? There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. The Pope has a phone. His and the ancient popes didn't have phones either. But there's nothing wrong with using technology. What I'm offended by is that we have chiefs and members of National Traditional Council wearing Nigerian clothes, cultural ambassadors dressed like South Africans and Nigerians, wearing blonde hair weaves on their heads and bleaching their skin. That is extremely offensive to our culture. And it's not only so offensive, it's a complete mockery of our traditions. You are a paid government chief on government payroll appointed to represent the traditions of the Basson people, of the Basal people. And you dress up 99% of the time, you dress like one Nigerian. Why? Why? Where's the outrage? And the people tax money is paying you to be traditional chief or culture ambassador. And will you have no reverence for the tradition that you're supposedly carrying and upholding? These are our people, and this is our tradition. This is what our people dress like in the North and Central region. This is what they dress like. Nigerian culture is beautiful, but it's not ours. Right. South African culture is beautiful, but it is not ours. We have a culture.
And what is this cultural ambassador anyway? Because if you're an ambassador, you should represent us. But we have placed the cultural part in a small corner. That's why in our schools we have African Costume Day.
Costume. Calling your culture embarrassing.
If we are getting married, getting married is different, but you have a separate day for traditional wedding, and then you have the wedding. Where are we going with this?
Everything and for me,
is relegated.
Yeah. Because
the me one is the European one.
Right. And they'll say that it's a Christian wedding.
Yeah.
They'll say it's a Christian wedding, but how is that a Christian? Wow, what is biblical about a white dress?
And cake.
And one cake and having the bridesmaids and the groomsmen, right? So anyway, my point here, doing this show and my point for pointing these things out is I feel like a lot of our tradition is not respected. And part 2 will maybe bring light to why. But it's important that we understand how incredibly deep and rich our traditions are. Old and ancient our traditions are. And, Liberia has a very profound culture that's unique also. You can go to the next slide. So young boys, and these set of photos that I'm showing next are from 1930. So young boys would go to schools. Young boys would go to schools for years. The traditional schools used to last for years. And you have one writer in the year 1910 who was cited as saying that, when you go into the villages of Liberia, you will not find a single boy between the age of 10 and 15 because they've all gone off to the bush school. So they would literally be isolated for years. So based on that, I'm assuming that it was like a 5-year process. And when you come back now, you're a man in the society or a woman in the society. I don't think they take even 1 year anymore. But then it was a long process for you to become acculturated. So we can kind of zip through the next slides and then we can take calls or input. But this is what, boys this age and girls this age would be separated and they would be taught how to do things that they needed to survive in the context of their culture. In the context of their culture, in the context of our culture. And in part 2, if you will watch next week, we're going to really break down in part 2 how some of this stuff becomes watered down and simplified, and they kind of start to lose a lot of the depth and the meaning over time as we abandon certain things, certain aspects of certain things and things. So culture is only as good as its usefulness. So some ways as the world changes, maybe they felt other aspects of our culture and traditions were no longer useful. So much of this is just ceremonial now. But you can see in the next slide, these young how to hunt with
Right.
bows. If you go to the
Yeah,
next slide,
yeah,
Dennis.
oh.
Yeah.
And before that, there's a slide here where it looks like a goat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they are happy. I don't a pet and they're playing with it, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
I have a dog, and someone was telling me, "Oh, so you white now? You get dog?" So I said, "But dogs, having a dog is our tradition. That's us. Why do we leave?" I had dog when I was in the deepest part of the right. I had a dog. So
And we men and the dogs in West Africa, in Africa, it was your dog was your tool, was your hunting partner,
yeah,
was your guardian while you rested, everything. There, when we did the episode about the ship Elizabeth, there was a African aboard the ship because some of the people were Native Africans. And remember what the whole tussle was over is because his dog that he refused to part with had gotten into an issue with the captain's dog, and they threw his dog overboard as punishment. He had almost had a nervous breakdown when they threw his dog overboard because he probably had raised this dog from being a puppy, and this young man and his dog were best friends. And here they're punishing him by throwing his dog overboard, and they had to stop him from jumping off the ship after his dog. That was the connection. So it is nothing strange about African people loving animals and treating animals with tenderness and kindness. The next slide, Dennis, shows two young boys hunting, and then I'm going to quickly get into the first. So that's just the bush schools, and then besides the traditional schools, we have a newer tradition, but it's still very old. And you can go ahead and read that slide quickly, Dennis.
the presence of Islam in West Africa dates back to 8th century, and the spread of the faith in regions that are now the modern states of Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Mali, and Liberia was a gradual and complex process.
Yeah. So of course, there's all the countries in West Africa. I didn't just list all of them. All the countries in West Africa, and many of the countries um, in Africa, period, are heavily influenced by Islam because it's extremely old. It's extremely old to the region. You're talking about the 8th century. So while everyone didn't adopt Islam in the 8th century or the 10th century or the 12th century or the 15th century even, eventually the cultural norms, you're talking about a period of and centuries of interaction and adaptation and gradual conversion of people. And then, of course, what happened with Samori Toure, which was a actual religious crusade and a forcible conversion of people in the 1800s, in the 1880s. But that's a different that's a different topic. This process, these people who were adopting Islam were adopting Islam after having been not empty of religion, not having no knowledge of God, because as I said, our people believed in God and were monotheists, but now adopting and falling in favor and in love with a new culture, in a new expression, a new way of expressing their devoutness to God, a new belief system, a new way of life, and it became attractive, and people started to adopt it, sometimes by will and sometimes by force. And if you want to know more about how Samori Toure really spread it in our region, watch the episode where we discuss Samori and the Wosulu Empire. But for this, for the most part, it was a gradual process and a voluntary process, and in some cases, a forced conquest that introduced Islam. You can go to the next slide, Dennis.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is the Liberia History Channel. We are studying tonight the history of our culture. If you want to be part of the conversation, please call the number on your screen, 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403 #. Call, make your comment, ask a question, or
Yes.
just some say, well, I understand it, I like it. So if you like it and you enjoy, just call and say I like it. That makes me feel better.
Right. So the next slide, while we're waiting for callers, this is an actual photo of Samori Toure when he was when he was captured by French forces. And I really, if you're interested in knowing more about Samori Toure, I would advise that you go back and watch that episode. So in 1898, he was captured and he died shortly thereafter in 1900. But this photo is from 1898 when he was taken into custody by the French, who he fought and successfully kept at bay for 2. Many of the Liberians who migrated to the north central region, this is not including Peru people who are much older to the region, but the influx of people from the 19th century and earlier, very, very early 20th century, were basically remnants of Woslo, of Samore's people. And they mostly settled in Lofa, Nimba, and what's considered Lofa, Nimba, and Bong today. And even you see some traders and so forth in as far east as Grand Jita and Sino and that, but the majority settled in North Central. And this is very evident. And they also opened schools. So they had, with the similar to the traditional schools, you had schools where students would study and memorize verses of the Holy Quran and learn how to, in some cases, if you were a very good scholar, how to read Arabic and learn the syllables and the pronunciation of Arabic. So you could pronounce the letters just like we pronounce the Roman letters. We know T is and S is. It's the same thing with the Arabic alphabet. Each character represents a sound, or a sequence of characters represents sounds. And so therefore you can then use that to write your own language and not Arabic. In our traditions in the last episode that our people, before the incoming of our repatriated, our people were reading and writing with the Arabic characters as well. And I said that earlier on. But this photo on the right is actually from 1926 with the 2 young men. And this is in the area that is now Banga, holding their Arabic script, probably verses from the Quran, I'm not sure. And they were in Banga. They were in Banga. So just to show, that was 1926. This is another photo from 1926 showing the influence from Woslu, the descent. This is also in what is modern day, either Ganta, I believe. Either Ganta, I believe it's Ganta. So here you have a man on a horse. And you know, horses are from the northern regions of Guinea, not even forest, the air forested area. So this horse, I don't know if the man traveled from there, but this horse definitely traveled from the savannah region of West Africa, because horses don't do well in our climate. And the poor horse was suffering in the man's hands. But if you go to the next picture, you'll see. So it's just to show, and it also in this photo, if you look at the women in the background, these are most likely Madinka women. 1926 again. This is a Muslim community. This is how, we see the foundational presence of Islam. And it was introduced, although these pictures are from the 1920s, especially when you go to the regions of King Mumuru and Bopuru and these places, the influence of Islam is much older than Samori Toure. It's just that Samori Toure expanded it tremendously, if that makes sense. Actually converting people by force, by will or force, I should say, to Islam. Whereas in Bopuru, you had people who had been, especially the leaders, who were Muslim by choice, pre-Liberia. So next slide. Go ahead, Dennis.
Although unlettered, Prophet Muhammad, may the mercy and blessing of God be upon him, understood the importance of literacy and education. He inspired his followers to seek knowledge and pass that knowledge on to others. He taught the importance of memorizing the Holy Quran and acting upon the knowledge it conveys.
Yes. So much of the process of being a scholar or being a student in Islamic schools in the 1700s, 1800s in our region, and in 1900s up to this day, is to memorize verses from the Holy Quran. So this has an incredible influence on our culture. And this is a picture from one of our villages and towns in Cape Mount, Grand Cape Mount County. And here you have probably an imam and a young boy holding up Quranic script. And this photograph is from 1910.
Hmm.
So we have a convergence of cultures, and we're going to talk about that in part 2 next week. So this is, you're going to have to stay tuned for next week. But this photo is going to also be on next week's slideshow. But these young men who were photographed here, this one is from 1930. These young men who were photographed here, you can't tell their ethnic groups by looking at them.
No.
They're not
Yeah.
all from the same ethnic group, the same language family, but most of them are either Pele, Loma, Madinka, Mano, those ethnic groups. And we'll talk about, why all these ethnic groups are put together. They're going to the same schools when these schools were opening, mission schools and all this kind of stuff. And there was a period when they were very comfortable still being who they were, wearing their clothes, whether, and then you have a lot of people who were part of a traditional faith not converting to Christianity. So while Christianity is very old, it's not as old as Islam in our region. Christianity is older than Islam, but not in our country. So Islam predates Christianity in our country. And when Christianity comes, some people convert from Islam to Christianity because of, again, going to these Western schools. And some people convert from traditional spiritual beliefs to Christianity, again, because of these same schools. So religion and belief system becomes a part of education and acculturation. We have numerous examples of Grand Cape Mount County where these Muslim kings would send their sons to learn the ways of the Western Negroes who have come. And then they would get up and end up being, Bishop Gardner. They end up being Bishop Gardner, right? Or they end up being J.J. Dawson's parents who go to Maryland and then say, you know what? We're Christians and our son is not going to, So J.J. Dawson's grandparents were Muslim. His parents were sent to schools to learn something and they decided to convert and abandon their people and their traditions. So this is an ongoing thing as we become Liberian.
I mean, look at the professor. Look at the professor's suit, man.
I know, right?
This is like, you see the way they dress, how elegant they are. It's like last year.
Yeah. So anyway, next slide.
Culture, genetics, and language are fluid.
People change. People grow. People get married. People convert. People think differently. This happens. So next week, we can go to the next slide, Dennis, and this is going to conclude my presentation. Next week, we're going to be talking about the history of our culture as we did today, but this is going to be part 2. And then it's going to conclude, and we're going to talk about how did we become one culture? How do we become one people? As I said in the beginning, we are more alike than unalike. And why is that? We're going to explain all of that next week.
And we already have callers on the line.
Excellent.
Let me bring them on. The first is Flomo Livingstone. Flomo, welcome to the show.
Great show. Yeah, great show. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Cole. Man, I learned a lot today. I have 2 questions. especially as Liberian, I mean, I feel like we are losing our culture. I don't know if because of American who want to learn, want to live the American culture. Is that why we're losing our culture? Especially when you talk about the bush school. Usually when I go back to Liberia, when I go to my village, and then I pretty much is. I don't even know if they're doing it there, probably. When they do it there, they don't even stay that long. Like, like before, like people used to hold it take that long. So I don't know what causing all that. Is it because of maybe modern day, like because we travel to, overseas and live in the diasporas who adopted our culture, so we don't want our children to do the same. So when you try to do it, they probably say, "Oh, the way you're doing is bad." Like even to dress as like during in our African clothes is kind of difficult. When you go back there in the village, they don't even discuss that. All the children they just want to be on a smartphone. They don't even think about putting African clothes on. They want to be dressing like European dress. So I don't know. Is it because of maybe the change of environment and the European system? Is that what causing all that? That's the question I want to ask.
Thank you, Flomo. Let me take one more caller and then call. I pass it to you. Aliyu, you're live.
I know you're wondering after I was calling the thing. No, actually, I've learned something today, and I really enjoyed it. If you notice, Dennis, there's more interest when it comes to this side of the Liberian history because it kind of like touches our genealogy. It's like taking it home. This is who we are for as a matter of fact. I usually make a statement maybe out of ignorance. I think it's actually out of ignorance that the Dane people were part of the Gola tribe, but Go have actually made me understand with documentation that it is not the case, and I'm completely convinced. Except that she has a lot of argument to make with some of those old Vikings when she say that they are isolate. I would recommend that I have a next slide to convince us more on this. I'm not just talking about the opinion part about it, but there are some very serious old 5Gs that would disagree with Go. So maybe we learn from her, when she explained this with some like she did with Amanda. There's no way you can argue anything she said today because they're all facts. And even some of us who are breeds of the Madino ethnic who don't know some of these things, I think in fact the way she presented this history is kind of sort of reconciliatory. And everybody will understand that Islam was sometimes imposed and sometimes it was voluntary. And did you know that, and I know Cole know this, that Madingo people in Ravakano were members of the Poro Society, higher hierarchy until Islam came, and they took themselves away totally from the Lama. Those were some of the hatred that started coming in between. Now, the Madingo girl will no longer sleep with the Lama man or with the Kisi man, so on and so forth. So, yeah, so we had it. So once they get to understand some of these things that, listen, you come from the same exact ancestry, they'll realize that these religions are not ours. But great show so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me get one more caller here, and that's Mr. Stephen Adams. You're live.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon and good evening to the lady. I admire her intellect so perversely. I always told you about that, and I will continue to call today because I am particularly sensitive to the topic of culture and accepting one's culture. So I'd like to preface this discussion or my discussion with the fact that people who do not ascribe to the culture cannot be progressive. And where do I start? I'm a member of the Poor Society. I've been a member of the Poor Society since I was a kid. My uncle took me into the Poor Society, and some of the things I learned in the Poor Society guided me through all of my life, all the way to undergraduate, graduate school, and high school. I was particularly incensed. But when I moved to Liberia in 2006, for about a 9-year 9 years period to see how completely, how the younger generation are completely extricating themselves from anything that were cultural oriented. When you spoke to some of the guys, even when you were traveling in Interior, and I travel all over the Interior, and I asked, hey, did you join the Parson side? Oh, no, that thing that man for country people. I couldn't believe that people that were uneducated, people that did not have any sense of commitment to the Western the Western way of life, were so committed to a fake and false premise that if you were to ascribe to your own culture heritage, and you were a country, you were native. I put that down to being because of the poor literacy rate in our country. And I'd like the lady to just discuss briefly how does she think we can begin to re-engage our population to accept the fact that we're not Europeans and that we should orient ourselves to our own culture to begin to develop self-respect for ourselves and for other people to develop self-respect for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for calling. That's all the call we have.
Okay.
Pass it back to you.
So I'll try to go backwards, see if I can remember. So the first thing is culture has to be useful. And all cultures evolve. There are many things that Europeans, Western Europeans who have heavily influenced us, had to throw away when they were conquered by Rome to become modern Europeans, right? So they had to get rid of many of their old traditions. And as people evolve and grow and now human knowledge expands, culture changes accordingly. So the importance of keeping your dignity, your identity, is about knowing what to, I wouldn't say, but what to put aside and what to keep. There are so many aspects of our traditions that we must carry forward for the sake of our dignity, for the sake of our self-respect. If you abandon everything you are and adopt everything someone else is, you are going to fail. Why are Asian countries modernizing in their own way, with their traditions, with their belief systems? A lot of people in China are Christian. A lot of Asians are Muslim. Most Asians are Buddhists, right? But all of these different faiths are in Asia. Some of them, adopted Christianity, but what they have all retained is a reverence for their past, the respect for it. Even traditions they no longer practice, they still respect. We have lost our self-respect. When I was a young girl in New York, I remember walking down the street and I had a head tie on my head because it was the 90s and that was a cool thing to do. So I had a head tie on my head with my baggy jeans, my backpack on, got off the train. I grew up in Minnesota, but I lived in New York briefly. And this homeless man, I think he was homeless, he looked like he was homeless, saw me and he said, "Black queen, you ain't never been nobody till you been yourself." And that stayed with me. You have never been anyone until you've been yourself. You can't be anybody but yourself.
Yeah.
And mimicking and adapting and changing into something that you're not is not productive. It's not uplifting. It's not good for your spirit. You have to embrace who you are. And the attack that we have against ourselves is just an internalized, I won't use the word hatred, maybe it's too strong, but we've internalized the disdain and the contempt that other cultures have for us.
Yeah.
And we have now embodied that, saying that, oh, these women with their breasts out, this is what this is. You've got sculptures, Greek sculptures, where they're naked men with their private parts exposed, and this is honored all over the world. Drawings and paintings of naked Greek goddesses. No one says that this defies human dignity, but because it is an African human form, suddenly we should be ashamed. Who taught us to think of ourselves this way? To see ourselves through the eyes of those who hold us in contempt is the problem. It's not about us going back and putting offerings under a cotton tree. It's about us respecting where we've come from. There's a difference. And then the other question, Aliyu, I have a whole show about Hawaii history. Please watch it. It's very thorough. It's something that I've studied intensely. In all due respect to the elders in Grand Cape Mount, my elderly in-laws included, I'm actually correct about this issue. I'm confident that I'm correct about this issue. There has been a lot of influence, and sometimes people cannot distinguish between influence and the roots, the foundational culture. The foundational culture is not migrant culture. It is endemic to the area. But what happens is Vai people were conquered many times over by Mende people. And so they have taken on the persona of their conquerors. And they've also intermixed with their conquerors. So many of the kings are actually descendants of Mende people. But the Vai language, the Vai culture, Vai as they will pronounce it correctly, the Vai people are endemic to the area. They are not a Mende language, the underlying part. But it's because of the conquest first by the Fulani, the Fall people from Futa Jalon had come down and conquered the region. Later on, the interaction from Mandinka people and others, they have now adopted and interacted, and sometimes even historically were almost indistinguishable from one another. But it's not because of a common root, but because of a convergence of cultures. So some of those elders are partly descendant from the Mende people, but mostly descendant from an endemic culture on the coast.
And the last one was from Stephen saying, "How can we?" Um,
No, the first one. The first
oh, yeah,
one I
that's what
answered
I
was
started with.
Stephen.
Yeah.
What was the first one again?
Flomo said, and the first and the last were the same. Flomo was saying that our people in the villages no longer practice the culture. They don't wear the African clothes. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's anywhere in the world. I've been to Asia. Asian people are not walking around wearing Asian clothes all the time. I mean, with the exception of India, which I haven't been to, but I think a lot of Indians wear their traditional lightweight clothes because of the heat, but they also wear a lot of Western clothes. And what I also want to say is that the clothes that we consider Western are not actually Western. They're universal. It's universal modern attire, and it's borrowed from various cultures, including ours. Right? Pants, trousers were invented in West Africa. This is a West African tradition to wear trousers. So the trousers that were introduced to,
I didn't know that.
Yes, it is. So even trousers that's not European or Western, that came from Africa. So there's a lot of different things that we adopt from each other globally. And as the world becomes smaller because of technology and transportation, modernization is a universal thing. It is not the property of any group of people. African people, our own people, have been actively involved in modernizing the world. So it is not something that is outside of us. Much of the technology that we rely on comes from the minds of Africans as well. It's not one group of people that is inventing the future alone. The future is evolving because of all these human cultures converging and interacting and making the world better and advancing the world. But pants were introduced to Europe by Moors from West Africa. So lots of things that we do, we can say are universally, modern culture. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the way we dress. It's influenced by many things, by Asians, by Africans, by Europeans, by indigenous peoples from all over the world. This is the modern world. It's really not about that. It's about us not losing the respect that we have for ourselves and not forgetting our contribution to the advancement of the human race. That is the problem. We have erased ourselves from the respectable commentary of human history. We've allowed others to erase us, and we've accepted our erasure. And we need to reclaim who we are and what we've done for the world. That's where we get our dignity and our inspiration to move forward. Not as beggars, not as subjugated people that need to beg other people to come and fill us because we're empty, but to remember what we've given the world and what we still must give the world. And most importantly, give to ourselves.
All right. I see a few comments here. Oswald say, hey, great episode. Do you have links to the sources of every episode? I'm doing a project on Liberian history and would like to be very helpful. Contact us. Let's talk about that.
I would just say go to YouTube, the Liberian playlist, and skim through and see what's there. This is a public service. And one of the things that's interesting is I've noticed people using my stuff out there. I'm like, cite your source, please. I'm not a historian, but I try, cite your sources. So you're welcome to browse through it. I do this as a public service, as a passion of mine. And I think this is a way for me to give back to Liberia. One of the ways that I give back to Liberia, but please utilize the resources that Dennis and his platform are provided on YouTube. The Liberian History Channel playlist is there. Other things are there. So there's a group in Ohio doing a documentary on E.J. Roy that was inspired by our 4-episode presentation on E.J. Roy. And the leader the leader of that project wrote me and said something that blew me away. He said, you know more about E.J. Roy than anyone alive today. And that just made me feel like, wow, you know more about E.J. Roy than anyone alive today. And I think he's saying that is because nobody has taken the time to study Roy to the extent that he, at least in his mind, that I have. I hope that's not true. I hope there's other people studying E.J. Roy because he was a great president of Liberia. But the information that this platform, Focus on Liberia, has presented to the world about our country is very important. And I think, Dennis, you need to be, commended for that. You and all your partners.
Right. And nobody ever makes song for Focus on Liberia to say. I'm posting again the playlist of the Liberian History Channel right there. So click on it and make use of the resources.
Yes.
Carl, thank you very much for tonight. I want to thank our viewers, and we'll even thank those who are going to watch later. Always focus on Liberia, man. Carl, you're closing.
I thought I did my closing. So I just want to thank everybody for watching. Please watch, to go to the playlist. The 2 episodes that are very closely related to this would be the episode of Basaw 360, which got really deep into very old history of Basaw people. Basaw 360 part 1 and part 2, especially part 1, goes way back before even the transatlantic slave trade, to talk about the history of our people, which again is the history of all Liberians, including the repatriates, because it predates their the forced removal of their ancestors. So that's important. The second thing is King Momoru of Bopuru was a very powerful episode in my opinion. Please watch that one. Especially for those of you that want to really understand who the real aristocrats and royalty were of the soil at the time the republic was established. King Momoru of Bopuru episode. It's not Salvoso. We had actual kings, not just some coastal slave trader who wasn't even really from here. But here we have our actual probably the most powerful king that coexisted at the same time that the republic existed, which was King Momoru. Every Liberian needs to know his name. So please watch that episode. And reach out to FOL or put your questions and comments under those posts. But yeah, there's a lot of wealth of information there. This is my passion. I've been doing this my entire life.
Thank you. And if you want to reach out, contact focusonliberia@gmail.com. You can do that also through our messenger link on Facebook, YouTube, and everywhere else. Again, thank you for spending your Saturday with us. This, in fact, is the last episode of the Liberia History Channel in the year 2023. We are very happy that we're able to do this for the entire year, and now we are closing for the year. Join us next week for part 2 of the history of our culture. Until then, my name is Dennis Jack, closing on behalf of the Liberia History Channel with our song that says, "We are all Liberians." Have a good night, and may God richly bless you.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home. Liberia people. Liberia.